Intelligence, consciousness and the mental process. The entire history of humanity, particularly the Bible, is an encrypted code of symbols and numbers. This code reveals the true origin of the mental process of consciousness, which has been falsely attributed to the psychic activity of the brain through science. God Satan shapes people by making them believe that everything happens in the brain within the neural network. In reality, the mental process arises from the soul, from pre-existence, that is, from the afterlife, the center of consciousness. The self is the place where we reason, and it is connected to the thalamus, which acts as the manifester of consciousness. This mechanism works like a mirror. The thalamus receives information both from consciousness, which dwells in the invisible, and from the brain. The brain does not generate thoughts, nor does it have autonomous psychic activity. It does not produce feelings, emotions, or memory, neither long-term nor short-term. It is only a manifester that receives thoughts from the invisible and transforms them into electrochemical signals, allowing the transmission and reception of physical and motor information. The self, the center of consciousness, emerges from the invisible and connects with the thalamus, which the Bible symbolically represents as the Tower of Babel. The thalamus is positioned between the invisible and the visible, enabling the mental process and the transmission of thoughts. Thoughts and information can be received from the invisible without the senses, but it is impossible to receive information from the senses without the invisible. Knowledge is acquired according to levels of consciousness gained before incarnation and manifests through principles of resonance and attraction. People with a searching consciousness attract knowledge in response to their thoughts, intentions, imaginations, actions, and needs, even during dreams. This searching consciousness functions like a mental automatism, free of prejudice, receiving information and knowledge from both the visible and the invisible worlds. However, when a system of mental control intervenes, the process of acquisition is altered. Experiences are transformed into prejudices, distancing the individual from the generator of life. This separation leads to the loss of the ability to distinguish, judge, and imagine in a generative way. The word intelligence comes from intelligere, composed of intus, inside, and legere, to gather, choose. Intellect means to read within, while intuition means to see within. The word intelligence and its synonyms suggest the idea of gathering from within, that is, from levels of consciousness acquired in the afterlife over thousands of years. This faculty makes it possible to instantly process an immense number of thoughts, fixed into our levels of consciousness and preserved by the generator of life. Levels of consciousness become reference points to distinguish what to believe and what to reject. To reach such levels, one must be a generator of life. Intelligence is the intuition that reveals the manipulator's tricks. Cunning is the ability to put the manipulator's will into practice. Wisdom is the ability to find reason in every situation, while justification makes one complicit. After birth, consciousness manifests as intuition, which can come from our levels of consciousness or directly from God Satan through a receiving channel. This activates the process of the searching consciousness and a path of exploration. When one incarnates on behalf of the generator of life, levels of consciousness are used to carry out one's project. But if one separates from the generator of life and incarnates on behalf of God Satan or oneself, degenerative levels are formed that contribute to the falsification of reality. The degree of manipulation depends on the levels of consciousness acquired in the invisible and on the chosen project for incarnation. Choices determine judgment and the formation of consciousness. The power that God Satan exerts on the mind depends on the alliance with the individual and their project of incarnation. If this occurs on behalf of the generator of life, God Satan can communicate only through receiving channels. If it occurs on behalf of God Satan himself, he becomes both receiver and transmitter, transmitting his levels of development and mental control. The manipulative influence of God Satan is always active, but a generative consciousness filters the thoughts and uses them to rise higher. God Satan can transmit thoughts while making them seem like our own, turning us into instruments of his will. One of the means through which God Satan acts is dreams. Even forgotten dreams produce déjà vu, which is nothing but the execution of a previously dreamed project. Having control over the mind and feelings, God Satan can generate emotions that people mistake for love or happiness. Everything that exists is generated by the generator of life through his allies, while what God Satan produces exists only thanks to these people. God Satan's manipulation is based on levels of consciousness. By being present within them, he writes through people, who become unconscious authors of texts, poems, music, and falsified narratives. God Satan can even make people see images, hear voices, or possess them, as in cases of demonic possession. In the Bible, consciousness is indicated in many ways. Nephesh, word tongue, neshama, breath, soul, ruach, air, spirit, psyche, living being, logos, reason, consciousness, thought, hand, action, kidneys, heart. The Bible describes consciousness as the heart. Heart of stone, heart of flesh, new heart. The word consciousness is entirely absent from the Old Testament for a precise reason. According to the coded system, the Old Testament represents the initial phase of the project, in which God Satan communicates verbally. In the New Testament, however, God Satan communicates through consciousness. For this reason, the word consciousness appears dozens of times in the New Testament. The human body is used symbolically as an encrypted code, aimed at transforming ways of thinking and living. In the Bible, organs such as the liver, kidneys, and heart are considered the seat of consciousness. This concept is closely tied to blood, not because consciousness resides in it, but because blood represents the sequence of creating the network of consciousness. Blood is also associated with the soul. The kidneys, synonymous with loins, back, and sides, symbolize the two aspects of the round-trip project in creating the network of consciousness. This process corresponds, before the 182nd year, to the opening of the portal and the forward passage, Easter. Afterward, it represents the capture of the self on the part of God Satan. If symbolic elements such as heart and blood were taken literally, then the same principle should also apply to liver and kidneys, attributing to them the function of being the seat of consciousness. Reflection on consciousness and reincarnation. Some believe that the dead have consciousness and can listen. This belief is based on the idea that after death they return to the afterlife, the invisible, where they were before reincarnation. Thus, the cycle of reincarnation continues. If it were true that the brain or heart correspond to consciousness, then how could the dead, lacking both brain and heart, still have consciousness and process thoughts? This happens because consciousness does not move to the afterlife. It is always there. It enters the body at the moment the umbilical cord is cut, that is, at the moment of reincarnation. Therefore, the idea that the brain generates thought, or that the heart is the center of consciousness, understood as the seat of feelings, is mistaken. Consciousness is something independent of matter and rises through millennia of experience in the invisible.